going to compliment you the entire time. He might be a little fresh.
The keystone in the arch of Star Wars.
For a show that I dearly love and admire. So thanks for having me.
Sorry, I'm getting like emotional.
And you got this hulking, scary dude with the big nose and the perfect hair.
I understand. This is a safe space. This is a safe space between you and I and all of your viewers.
Cassie and Jim on the beach, and people are like, no. I can literally hear people out there, no.
Rogue One was awesome. I love the Han Solo movie, and then of course I love The Mandalorian.
And like getting to talk to fans face to face and learn their names and just, get to hear their stories.
And the world of Star Wars, there's a bunch of people who look different, and are different species. There's lizard men, there's psychic baby swamp monsters.
I joke that the best thing about writing Princess Leia is everybody knows who she is, and the worst thing about writing Princess Leia is everyone knows who she is.
And also you get Ewoks, and I am definitely a lover of Ewoks.
You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Yes, it's a good thing. It's a great thing.
Well, welcome to Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I'm your host, Pete Fletzer. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you are watching us live, that means you're a patron. Thank you so much for being a part of our family. And if you're watching this later, for as little as $3 a month, you can be a part of the live virtual audience when we record these episodes with amazing guests. We talk to everybody from Oscar-winning special effects artists. We talk to authors. We talk to social media voices. We talk to actors. We talk to anybody really who will talk Star Wars with me, frankly, is about what we do here. But today, I'm really excited. I actually have two guests for the first time in quite some time. We are joined by Joe Corroney and Brian Miller, two artists who have been contributing to Star Wars for many, many years and are going to be part of Star Wars Celebration. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So instead of me rambling a bit, let's bring in our guests. Joe, well, let me get you in the right boxes here. There we go. Okay, good. I am not Brian Miller. I am Pete Fletcher. Brian, Joe, how are you? Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Hey, it's great to be here. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. So, as I said at the top, you guys are artists. You've been doing, people have seen your work. People, in fact, I was talking to somebody today about who my guests were going to be, and they were like, "Wait a minute, you're getting the guy that does those propaganda posters? That's awesome. I got to see those." So that's really great. So maybe let's go around here. Brian, maybe do a quick little introduction. Tell us about who you are.
Sure. My name is Brian Miller. I am a comic book colorist, I guess, by trade for like Marvel and DC and Image. And then I'm also an illustrator. So I've had the good fortune to work on a lot of properties, including like The Simpsons and Archer and X-Files and Doctor Who. And then, of course, our most beloved Star Wars.
That's awesome. And Joe, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Joe Corroney. I'm a illustrator as well, also a comic book artist, and primarily I've worked in the Star Wars saga for the last, almost the entirety of my professional career for the last 25 years now, almost, I think. So most of my illustration work has been for Star Wars and also other properties like Star Trek and X-Files, G.I. Joe, Doctor Who, lots of comic books, lots of trading cards, lots of posters.
So you've it's pretty interesting that you've ended up getting so attached to a franchise like Star Wars. Maybe I'll start with you, Joe. Tell me a little bit about your first Star Wars experience. Do you remember seeing it the first time? And do you remember how it impacted you?
Well, I mean, Star Wars is the reason I became an illustrator. It was the first movie I remember seeing in the theater. I was barely 4 years old, so it was right before my 4th birthday. So I saw the original film in 1977 with my family. So, and this was before it was A New Hope. It was just Star Wars,
right?
And it left a profound impact on me. I mean, my imagination at that age was just sort of getting off the ground, and and seeing that film as a very impressionable young child, just really, without me even realizing it, dictated the course for the rest of my life. So I ended up getting the Marvel Comics adaptation of Star Wars, and that's how I relived the movie as a child, because we didn't have, back then VHS wasn't really readily available. We didn't have streaming, of course, or anything digital or DVDs even. So the way I relived Star Wars, I was so fascinated with it, was through the comic books from Marvel, but also a year later when the action figures came out, I would play with the toys and I would actually draw the action figures. So the Star Wars comics as a kid introduced me to the world of comic books, and then from there I started, reading other comics and stuff. But it really inspired me to draw at an early age, and just to keep my imagination very inspired all the way, through high school, then into art college. And then I wanted to draw Star Wars comic books when I got to art college. And a few years later, I got to do that eventually. And I just pursued a career in Star Wars art.
It's so interesting. And you bring up a really cool point. And actually, I spoke about this about 3 years ago with Anthony Bresnikan when he was on the show. He talked about how, because we didn't have this access to movies that we have now, even it wasn't even on HBO until like 80, 81, something like that. So
80s, yeah.
It took a while to even get to that. So it was all these other avenues that caused us to be creative, whether it was the action figures or it was the comic books. For me, it was the Story of Star Wars LP that I listened to until like barely, the grooves were gone. How about you, Brian? What was your entry into Star Wars?
Well, I've got one, but I will say you just brought back some fond memories with that Star Wars storybook with the record inside. And I'm like you, I'm sure I listened to it a million zillion times, just over and over and over, and probably knew every picture by heart. But I grew up in a really small town, and my grandparents owned this little tiny grocery store. And it's what on the East Coast you call a bodega, like just 3 aisles, little tiny. And being part of the family, we'd go in and help out in the family store. And one of the things that they had behind the counter was like this row of like penny candy and nickel candy and bubble gum and stuff like that, and Star Wars trading cards. And I just remember every time I would go in to help out at the grocery store, at the end, my grandmother or grandfather would say, we'll pick something out from the candy aisle. And every time I'd go for the Star Wars trading cards. And so I remember, opening the Topps package with the waxy paper and going through the cards and breaking my teeth on that hard stick of gum and reading the back of the cards and learning all the characters. And I had this little like chair in my room. I put the stickers on, because you got one sticker in every pack of cards. And the whole chair ended up covered with stickers. And so that was maybe one of the gateways where I really got involved in Star Wars as a kid. You play with the toys or you see a coloring book or something, but in those cards where you could just one at a time, just look at it and study it, because in the movie things went by really fast. And like Joe said, we didn't have VHS. So to have something where you could see like a moment in time from the film and really study it, or even like the puzzles that were on the back when I don't remember how many pieces it was 9 or 18 or whatever, you put the puzzles together. And some of those puzzle scenes were like the biggest quality version of a still image that you had seen at that point. And you're just like, oh, this little wire on R2-D2 coming around the back of his leg. I never noticed that before. It's so cool. So I think just all that visual stuff from the Topps cards really got me excited. And then I would go to the coloring books or get the piece of paper and start sketching and playing around as a kid. But the idea that I would someday get to work professionally on Star Wars was not even a notion at that point.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too to hear you say that, because I think one of the things with the trading cards and even any image we could find, whether it was in a magazine or whatever, that's one of the reasons why those background characters came to life. That's why Hammerhead had a life, right? That's why there was so much that we brought it, because we just kept digging into that. I've talked about it before on the show, but I always think about how this one throwaway line about the Clone Wars that Obi-Wan and Luke have in the hut. It's just like there was so much there, and we just dug so much into that. And I remember my dad, I was 7 years old when I saw Star Wars. I remember my dad's like, what do you think the Clone Wars was? And we had this whole story in our head. And so I can see where it would inspire that creativity, especially you two, obviously, as kids were creative. That's the direction you went. Do you feel like that inspired you to your creativity? Did you write the stories in your head? Did you draw the characters, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I had fun even making my own Star Wars characters and designs and stuff as a kid. It definitely inspired me to just, I mean, I would, of course, the action figures, I would tell my own stories and adventures that way. But then even some of the role playing items, I remember the plastic blasters and the plastic lightsabers that were, that were kind of silly. But me and my friends would play with these Star Wars toys, and I would be Luke and my friend would be Han, and we would go in my backyard and explore and climb on the garage and have adventures. So yeah, obviously it just really, like, it kind of, I can't remember my childhood without Star Wars involved in some big way, because every 3 years there was a new movie, so there was always new coloring books and new toys, and just there was so much that it was just kind of what we lived for as kids.
Yeah.
Well, and every Halloween was Star Wars, right? Because that's they might have been the little junky costumes from the store, but still, like, a large majority of kids when I was a kid went as Star Wars characters. And every birthday party, not every birthday, but lots of kids would have Star Wars stuff at their birthday party, the plates and the cakes and the things. So it's like, beyond just the movies, especially as kids, there was so much merch and stuff that we were just like constantly surrounded by Star Wars, but in like a positive way, and like a way of like, in a world where you can't just watch the movie over and over and over whenever you want. We had to grasp for whatever was out there that was Star Wars and just like consume it and eat it all up, because that it lived and breathed it for sure.
Yeah, I 100%, and it definitely was that. The only way to consume Star Wars was to put yourself into it somehow, right? Like whether it was through playing or whatever. And it was such a really, and it was also, it felt like it was a little club, right? And until the internet really exploded, like I always felt like it was me and the 3 or 4 guys who we were all big into Star Wars when we were kids. And then when we found out that the whole world was into Star Wars, it was kind of like, wait a minute, this club is pretty big.
Yeah, it was always cool when you met a new friend at school, and even though Star Wars was huge and it was so groundbreaking back then, it still, I mean, now it's hard to imagine, because it literally is everywhere now, especially because the way Disney has gotten behind it 1,000%. But back then it was big too, but still it was sort of like you'd meet a new friend and you'd be like, wow, you love Star Wars too. And instantly it's like that now still, but I just remember, making friends at school with our mutual love for, and just passion for it.
Is that
and there were those,
right?
there was like those dark times before the prequels, when there wasn't as much Star Wars stuff.
Right.
It wasn't necessarily cool for a while. And, and to be a fan was kind of like you were just holding on to the past. And so there was that weird span of time when we're all kind of like, well, what is happening with Star Wars?
Yeah,
so that was nice to see it come back strong,
I remember in college, especially, because it felt a little more like a cult thing during our college years, because Star Wars was big, obviously, but this is like pre-special edition before the movies came back out. So it was, and then of course Star Wars was kind of reintroduced to the world all over again. So there were years there, where it felt like, oh, okay, you still love Star Wars and you're in your early 20s. That's awesome. Okay, we can be, let's be friends. So I remember that as well.
It was a slightly more exclusive club, because you're willing to admit it, and you're in your 20s. That's cool. We can be friends. Just we don't have to tell anybody. But that's pretty cool. So now, how did you end up getting into the specific sort of? I guess you both come in through comic books? Is that correct? Or
I came in from it from one of my very first professional publishing assignments was for the Star Wars role-playing game back in the mid-90s. So
was it the West End Games?
Yeah. 1996, West End Games, the whole D6 system.
Yeah.
So right out of art college, I had sent a portfolio to them because for years prior, I had been collecting the books. I'd been collecting the little miniature figurines. Me and my college roommates would play the role-playing game. Again, this was during the dark years, going back to when the game came out in like 1988, and there wasn't a whole lot of Star Wars content out there. I remember going to the comic book shop as a kid going, wow, what are these cool Star Wars books, these game books? And instantly I bought them because it was there wasn't much Star Wars stuff out at all at that point. But then I got out of art college. I sent my portfolio to the publisher, and within a few months I was illustrating the role-playing game for them, just hundreds of illustrations. I illustrated for about 13 different Star Wars game books. And that along with that, at the same time I was freelancing, I was also getting my feet wet in independent comics and pursuing a comic book illustration career as well. So, and that's kind of where Brian and he had a similar path, and I'll let Brian explain it, but we ended up sort of meeting down the road years later and working together on Star Wars.
Cool. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess the best way to tell it would be that, like Joe said, struggling in independent comics, and one day I get the call, and this guy says, "Hey, are you Brian Miller? I'm looking at your portfolio." And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "This is Rob Liefeld. I need your help on coloring some pages for a cable comic." So I did that. It came out. It was awesome.
I mean, how did you respond to it? This is Rob Liefeld, right? At that point, we were like,
what?
At
that point, I'm just kind of in shock, and I'm just, I'm trying to play it cool. I'm like, okay, all right, 5 pages. I could do 5 pages. Yeah. When do you need them? Oh, tomorrow morning. Sure. Yeah, no problem. I can do that. We're talking like dial-up internet days. So he's sending me artwork over AOL Instant Messenger. I'm up all night. I think I got him to him by like 2 a.m. He still called me right back. And he's like, yeah, these look great. Just make one change. So I did that, pass out. And I literally wake up to the phone ringing the next morning, like 9 o'clock or something, and pick it up. And like, is this Brian Miller? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, it's either Mark Powers or Pete Franco at Marvel Comics. And they're like, are you the guy that colored, or wherever it was, pages 9 through 12 or something? And I was like, I'm just in my mind, I'm just like, oh fudge, what did I do? What did I screw up? This is my big break, and I ruined it. But I'm like, yeah, I colored those pages. And like, we love them. They're like, how about you do a pinup for the back of the issue? And I was like, sure, yeah, I'll color a pinup. When do you need it? And they said, tomorrow. And I was like, I see a theme here. But so it looks like an overnight success. But like Joe said, there was just all this years of working on stuff no one's ever heard of, and then boom, you get that one break, and you're like, Marvel, and then that turns into everything Marvel's doing, and then everything DC's doing. And eventually I get to go to Mid-Ohio Comic-Con, home of Joe Corroney. And so a mutual friend of ours, Justin, had invited me to this convention. And again, early days, so I'm having to like lug a big computer and monitor to show off what digital coloring is, because no one really knows what it is at that point.
Right.
So I'm on the panel and I'm showing off, and then I get to go and Justin's introduced me to people, and he introduced me to Joe, who already has this just huge portfolio of like awesome Star Wars art and samples. And we really hit it off. I think probably the three of us went to dinner afterwards at that con or something. I think that was the year like all the Batman crew was there.
Yeah, it was like 1996 or 90,
yeah, it was like Adam
like
West and Riddler and Batgirl. And, yeah. I mean, it was a lot.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a non-Star Wars aside. I got there the day before the show, and downtown, was it Cincinnati?
It was Columbus.
Columbus, downtown Columbus. Like when the sun goes down, they bring in the sidewalks. There was like nowhere to get dinner or anything. So I just go to like the hotel bar, and I sit down at the hotel bar, and I'm like, give me a burger and fries or something. And like 2 seats down, this guy sits down next to me, and it's Adam West.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm again trying to play it cool. And I'm like, yeah, I saw your article in Car and Driver last month where you test drove the new Lexus. That was really cool. And then like, as soon as he said one word, I'm like, and I love Batman. And so he put up with me through dinner, but like that made the show until I met Joe Corroney, which made it even better.
Yeah, right.
And, so that was our introduction. But then it was like, we just knew each other. We just just ran into each other. It was like what, another decade before we worked together.
Yeah, I mean, I think we ran into each other maybe a couple other times in between, but we didn't really work together until around 2000 and God, what was it? 2005, I think, for Star Wars Insider. So I was already illustrating Star Wars for Lucasfilm on different little publishing things, and Star Wars Gamer magazine, the role-playing game for Wizards of the Coast at that point.
Right.
So I'd gotten so busy also with some comic book stuff, independent stuff I was doing, and then I was doing some stuff for Marvel actually at that time too. And I was like, I was getting so much work. Justin actually is like, hey, you should get Brian Miller, give him a call and have him help you out with this Star Wars project, so you can, he does great work. And I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome, great idea. So I reached out to Brian, and we got to illustrate General Grievous for the very first time before Revenge of the Sith that had even come out in Star Wars Insider. They did a special preview of the character before the trailer even revealed him. So we as artists, we were able to introduce to the Star Wars fans who were reading Star Wars Insider at the time, that we got to introduce General Grievous through some artwork for that magazine. Wow. So that was our first official project together on Star Wars, and then we ended up teaming up a year later or so, and then from there it just became continuous for the next probably 10 years on working together on different Star Wars projects for Star Wars Insider and trading cards and celebration prints and you name it, Hasbro, all kinds of stuff. So
that's great. And so tell me, you mentioned Celebration, and so before we get too far, I don't want to forget to let's talk a little bit about what you're doing at Celebration, and I guess the two of you will be together at Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim at the end of May. And when this comes out, that'll be just a couple weeks away. It's going to be, I can't believe it's coming up that fast. So tell me a little bit about what you're planning for Celebration.
Brian, go.
Okay.
I'll go. What's coming.
Let's see. So Star Wars Celebration, we have an art show, and so Joe and I are two of the I'll say approximately 30 artists that Lucasfilm selected for the art show. I think by the time this comes out, they will have announced who those artists are, so we'll know exactly how many people were selected. But we were very fortunate to be selected for the art show, and we've each created a brand new, unique illustration for the Star Wars Celebration art show, and that artwork will be exclusive, only available to those attending Star Wars Celebration. And hopefully, again, by the time this comes out, hopefully today, you can go and pre-order those Star Wars Celebration exclusives. Those will be limited to 250 pieces each. They should be available for pre-order from Acme Archives and Dark Ink Art. You will need to pre-order them from their site. And then when you come to Star Wars Celebration, they'll have a system where you can pick up, redeem and pick up the artwork. And then once you do that, you can bring it to Joe and I and get autographs and chat with us and talk about all the fun Star Wars stuff that we love. But you'll need to go through those steps to get it. And we are kind of telling people, especially after a couple of years where there's not been an in-person celebration, I think the pre-orders are probably like the best way to go this time around, because there's just a lot of these will probably sell out, and we would feel really bad for people who show up and think they're going to, Sunday I'll stop by and see Joe and Brian and pick up some artwork, and then Sunday comes and it's all gone. And we've seen that kind of thing happen before, but we really are sort of getting the signals that this year that's going to be accelerated. So if you have any interest in the art show, whether it's me or Joe or any of the other art show artists, you are going to want to go on to Acme Archives and Dark Ink Art and pre-order those beforehand. And it's going to make it a lot easier too, because you probably won't have to wait in as many lines when you can just come and redeem and get the artwork.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll put a link to that in the show notes if you're listening or watching. We'll make sure that's added. Can you talk a little bit about what your work's going to look like, or is it too soon to talk about that,
Joe?
We can tease it since it hasn't been. By the time actually, by the time this airs, they will be revealed, won't they, Brian? So I guess we can go ahead and talk about them. So I would say if you're a big fan of Solo, a Star Wars story, which I am as well, I think you might enjoy my artwork, or at least I hope you do. It's artwork inspired by the movie Solo. So
cool.
So when fans go on to acmearchives.com or darkink.com, to the pre-order link, they'll be able to see this artwork featuring a young Han Solo and Chewie in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon, taking off for another adventure. The artwork's called Punch It Chewie, and it's a pretty
that's awesome
dynamic angle of an action shot of the two of them in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. So I tried just to bring all my comic book design sensibilities. I've done a lot of comic book covers over the years, and a lot of action oriented covers, and especially with Brian. So I kind of dialed into that and tried to create something kind of dynamic and exciting with some dynamic lighting, dynamic perspective, and just featuring the two main heroes from that film. So,
and I'll say that I've seen a sneak peek of it, and action is the right word. I mean, I've never seen a more like dynamic version composition of the inside of the Millennium Falcon cockpit, especially with the action that Chewie's taking. It looks phenomenal. And again, hopefully today you can go see it for real online. But once you see it, you'll just be clicking that buy button all day long because it's awesome.
Thanks, fantastic. So tell me a little bit about how you guys work together. For people who, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, I'm not as much of a comic expert as I'd like. Maybe tell people a little bit how you guys work together. How do you approach a project like the Star Wars Celebration one, for example?
Well, I think Brian should tease his print really quickly first. So actually, you might as well just, and then we'll get into that. So
yeah, well, I can work that out. So let's see. I will say that I got to visit a galaxy far, far away a few years ago,
right?
And I put a little sketch in my sketchbook that day. And like happens a lot of times with when you're working on Star Wars, is they'll say, hey, pitch us some ideas. And so with Celebration, I had come up with some different ideas, and I pitched them, and I got the thing back. They're like, Brian, we love both of these, but what else you got? And this has happened to me before. This seems to be like a theme in my career. They're like, what else you got, kid? So I said, well, I have this thing in my sketchbook. And so I showed it, and they're like, yes, that's it. This is your Star Wars Celebration 2022 illustration. You have to do this. So I said, okay. So again, teasing it like Joe did, I'll say that it just worked out to be timely because there's all this news and videos and things coming out about the different experiences on Batuu and Black Spire and everything to do with that right now. So if you've been there or if you've dreamed of going there, I assure you, when you see my illustration, it will bring back all those memories of what you like about Black Spire Outpost and Batuu, and maybe going and grabbing your significant other and going on your perfect dream voyage to a galaxy far, far away. So that's my tease.
And if you imagine it in Brian's style, and his work as far as like not just the propaganda stuff, but even like travel posters, I think that would give you a pretty good idea of what to expect with his print. And hopefully you can head over to acmearchives.com and check it out.
That's
and fantastic. I'm just realizing, Joe, that we both have the Falcon in our piece this year.
Right.
So inside and outside. So you get them both.
Yeah, right. You need them both. You got to put them together so you can have that full Falcon experience. That's right. That's really great. So yeah, I mean, you do have a very unique style, Brian, as do you, Joe. Brian, you're known for the propaganda posters, and even like I love the you have an X-Files I Want to Believe poster, which is kind of done in that 50s kind of classic, alien sci-fi movie kind of thing. How did you end up with that as a sort of a style that you chose?
I'm really a fan of all things vintage, and that could be anything from like the propaganda style or like mid-century modern, or even like going farther back to like Art Nouveau and stuff. And just I just kind of like, I feel like I'm a sponge when it comes to visual things. I'm interested in history, and I'm always just taking little bits and pieces from the past and incorporating it into like my own design sensibility. And Joe and I worked together for so long, and also being in comics, I get to, as a colorist in comics, I'm coloring some of the most legendary artists ever, Perez and Jimenez and just, I don't know, the list goes on forever, Dan Jurgens, just like all these legends. And so that I learn a lot from them, but it's also intimidating, right? Because I don't feel like I can do what they can do, and I can't do what Joe does. And so I was like, well, what's my style look like? What am I bringing to the table? And so I really had to dig into those design sensibilities and and like figure out what my visual style was. And so the very first Star Wars piece I did was a propaganda poster with the AT-ATs smashing down into the snow and crushing the rebellion. And I remember, I finished the illustration, and some of the people at Lucasfilm and Acme Archives looked at it and they're like, "This is cool, but we don't know. We don't know if this is going to play with Star Wars fans or not." And that event, it was like I don't know, 20 or 30 artists, and it had like I want to say it was like a 2-week sales window. And they're like, "Well, we'll see how it does. We'll put it out there, but we're not sure." And I don't remember if it was like day 2 or day 4. They completely sold out. And so, and for better or worse, as artists, we shouldn't have to be focused on how things sell, but that's how companies measure success of things. And so at that point, they're like, "Oh, okay, people like this clearly. So yes, go ahead, Brian, and do some more." And so that really gave me the freedom to then develop that style and push into it farther and try some new things, which has been just so much fun and such a blessing that the fans accepted it when it was a little bit different than some other things out there. But it was also good for me because, again, like, I look at the amazing portraiture and like photorealistic stuff that Joe does, and I can't do that. That's so outside of my wheelhouse. So I'm just glad that people accepted the art that I create too.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because that's one of the things that strikes me about Joe's work is it captures that there's that realism, but yet somehow you still have a comic book sensibility to it. And maybe, as you were just talking about with your with the piece that you have for Star Wars Celebration, there's always there's some action in it. How do you go about drawing characters or creating artwork with characters that, we talked about at the top? I mean, Star Wars is just ingrained in everything we do. How do you go about, sort of trying to create that? And do you feel any sort of pressure to make it look just right? Or how do you, maybe just share your process a little bit?
Well, I think my work, even in my early work, comic book illustration work, from like the mid 2000s on, I was really pushing for more and more realism in my work, in my comic book work, because I wanted, as a storyteller and as a movie fan, I wanted to make my artwork as cinematic as possible. And as I was doing comic book work, I was also doing illustration work for Lucasfilm on Star Wars. So it was kind of like the streams started to cross more and more, because with Star Wars, the artwork that I responded to as a fan, and then I noticed, other fans responding to it as well, was artwork that really captured the spirit and the soul of the films with, the likenesses of the characters. And that's not to say that anything stylized isn't Star, because I mean, I love stylized artwork as well. It's just me personally, I was always pushing for realism and a cinematic feel in my artwork, because that was the kind of artwork I wanted to see and do. And with Lucasfilm always kind of saying, well, that's good, but it needs to look a little bit more like Mark Hamill or a little bit more like Harrison Ford. So it just became intuitive to me to want to create artwork using, accurate likenesses and drawing from reference as much as possible to make it feel like if you opened a Star Wars comic or even a Star Trek comic, that I was drawing, you could look at it and go, "Oh, this feels just like the movie." So that just became, that realism became part and parcel to like my entire kind of illustration path at that point. And yeah, it just comes from practice and using a lot of reference and studying details and studying, just being a hardcore fan of Star Wars and knowing, what certain blasters are and what certain costume pieces are. And as a fan, I enjoy that research and having that knowledge and geeking out with my friends about, different weapons or different spaceships and knowing, the names of all of those. So yeah, I mean, it's just incorporating as much of that passion for Star Wars and passion for the films and into my artwork, and trying to capture that cinematic quality that Star Wars is kind of known for as the gold standard of when especially when it comes to like artwork and licensing stuff. So
Yeah. Do you find that you watch the movies differently as a result? Are you looking for things, or are you able to just kind of enjoy the films as a different medium, or how does that
Yeah,
work for
that's
you?
a good question. I think Brian mentioned this the other day. Like we still enjoy it as fans first and foremost. Like we kind of just we can turn our brains off and just kind of like absorb it and have fun. Um, and then eventually, I think once if we get a certain project or assignment, we'll go back and kind of rewatch those sections of the films, or maybe what I'll do is I'll crack open one of my books off my shelf and flip through it and go really study, that scene or that costume. So
Yeah.
I think the passion in that sort of like encyclopedic knowledge, especially that Joe has, it allows you to imbue the artwork with a couple of things. Hopefully, a more believable feeling, like it feels like Star Wars. You believe that it's in the Star Wars universe, and then also things like Easter eggs. I mean, I think Joe and I are both sort of fans of hiding little Easter eggs in our artwork sometimes, and because something that you geek out about is also there's probably a couple of thousand other fans out there that will also geek out about it. So then they go, oh my gosh, you hit that little silhouette of the Tusken Raider up on that hill. And they're like, I didn't see that for the first 6 months after I bought the artwork, but when you get that email or you see that person, they said, then it was worth the effort to do it. And because someone noticed it and then they got joy from that. And then they went and told someone else about it. And so I think that's kind of the difference between like illustrating something you're really passionate about, like Star Wars, or just having like, oh, I have an illustration job I need to do. Right. So we're such big fans and geeks ourselves that I feel like the process of creating is ever a bit as enjoyable as when we're watching one of the shows or animations or films, because you're still in the world, and that's kind of what it's about.
Yeah.
That's great. What might be one of your favorite little Easter eggs that you've thrown into something that people can now go back and try to find?
I know I just did a poster recently for The Mandalorian, which came out. I think it came out after season 2 had ended, so this would have been last year. It came out like last summer, I believe, and it's called Legacy of the Dark Saber. And if you've watched Mandalorian season 2, you know how Mando gets the Dark Saber, how he ends up with it, and he has that big dramatic fight scene with Moff Gideon, and Bo-Katan is involved in the plot as well. And so I did this poster with the Mandalorian holding the Dark Saber in one hand, and he's holding Grogu in the other. And it's a very kind of like I don't know. It was kind of inspired by like maybe like Frazetta art with the warrior with the sword and that kind of approach. And I put these little Easter eggs all throughout because I think it's mentioned in season 2 Mandalorian when Bo-Katan tells Mando the history of the Dark Saber and Tar Vizsla, the first Mandalorian Jedi. So I have like a little Easter eggs of little icons of Tar Vizsla that we've seen from Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and we see him in the artwork. And there's like along the border, I illustrated in Mandoa the Foundling Creed. Just little. It's little subtle things, but they're like little graphic decorations along the artwork. And if you know where to look, you can see like the Mudhorn logo from Mandalorian's Pauldron, in the background is kind of a wallpaper, really subtle in the background of the art. So things like that. I mean, I just went that one in particular, I went kind of with the Easter eggs, I kind of threw them all in there just for fun. So
well, and that's truly coming from that passionate spot too, right? Because I remember, I can draw a square, and that's about as much as I can do. But I remember all the Star Wars artwork that we had as children, and constantly looking at it, and always somehow, even a photo from I don't know what the garbage compactor or something, just picking up something different every time. And the love that you're putting into your images that people might not pick up till they've had it hanging in their house for 8 months, and like, wait a minute, I just noticed that thing. What about you, Brian? Have you put any Easter eggs in any of your illustrations that you're particularly?
Yeah, I mean,
proud of?
I think I already mentioned the little Tusken Raider, and there's been a few others, but I'll tease the new one, the Star Wars Celebration one. I'll just tell everybody, like, look out for the First Order stormtroopers. They're in there. There may be causing some problems in the background somewhere, so keep an eye open.
That's great. That's really cool. So I was asking before, for people who don't fully understand how a colorist and a illustrator and designer all work together. How do you guys work together, and how have you worked together over the years?
Usually, if I've gotten an assignment, first thing I do is I email Brian and I'm like, hey, I've gotten, this project's been pitched to me. Do you want to work together on it? And then so usually I'm penciling and inking or doing really tight pencils, scanning that artwork, and sending it over as a high-res file to Brian via email or something like a shared FTP. And then Brian will download it, and then he'll add his layer of coloring to it. I'm giving him art notes. He can go into how his technique from there, but I'll give him kind of a detailed description of maybe what I'm going for in terms of the visualization of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, Brian brings his own like sensibilities and his own ideas and suggestions, and he knows more about color theory and color design, than anybody I know, really. So working with him, it's always elevated my artwork. Even in the years since, when we've been working independently as well, I mean, I'm still absorbing. I've still absorbed that knowledge from working with him and applying it to my own illustrations that I do in my own career. So.
Yeah, and I would add to that, one of the things that I love about working in comics is that it is a collaborative medium, and it's rarely the case that one person is wearing all the hats, right? So it happens, but not all the time. So when you get to work with multiple artists and writers and storytellers, that sense of collaboration, I think, elevates the project. And so when Joe and I have these opportunities to work together, I'm learning so much from him about like composition and theming, and just how he like composes the illustration. And then when it comes to me for color, I'm taking all the information he's given me. It could be notes, it could be reference, it could just be like thematic ideas, absorbing all that, and then going to town with the color and paint. And I try to pay attention to things like texture, so that the surfaces don't all look the same. So if you've got, Obi-Wan's robes need to feel like they have a certain like fabric texture and look different from the sand on Tatooine, and look different from the ships or the sky or whatever, so that it just isn't all just a mono surface. And trying to pay attention, especially to like light and shadow. One of the things that can happen to any of us that work on licensed property is you might get some pose reference from the client, you might get some face reference from the client, you might get weapon, all these like disparate things. And if you only draw from what they give you, you could end up with like the light on the face is coming from one side, but the light on the body is on the other. And as artists, we usually are smart enough to catch these things. But when you go to that final color and paint stage, you really want to pay attention to it. So just making sure that all the lighting, is really consistent and works across the character, so the character pops and has that like lifelike believability to it. So just trying to read in all those like visual storytelling elements and just reinforce all of them with color and light, because these gorgeous black and white illustrations, as artists, we know exactly what they are, right? But sometimes the public can have a little bit more of a challenge seeing the depth and seeing the composition. So the color is there to hopefully clarify those things and make it easier for the fan or the viewer to take it all in and like get really excited about it.
That's great. Do you find that having worked together for so long, you kind of now have a sort of an unspoken language on the work you do together?
I think so. Yeah. When we both do happen to team up these days, or even just share feedback on each other's artwork, there is a shorthand where we like it could just be like a couple words and we know exactly what that means in terms of what the other one's thinking or what the other artist might want to see or apply to the artwork. So it's and through those solid 10 years or so that we worked together. I mean, we've worked on hundreds and hundreds of illustrations. So we've definitely kind of shared sort of a psychic link when it comes to our artwork.
Yeah, I was going to say visual shorthand. I mean, I think that's exactly what it is. And I would also say, you know, because it has been a while, to any Star Wars fan who missed that window of all the like Star Wars insider work that Joe and I was doing, some of the most amazing, you know, we get to work with all these short story writers illustrating things that maybe some had been seen on screen, but a lot of them had not been seen on screen. And to me, you could just take all those and create like its own collection or graphic novel or something, because it was during a time when there wasn't as much content coming out.
Yeah, pre-Disney.
And if you wanted to see like original visual storytelling, there's so much good stuff there. I would recommend everybody go back and check it out.
And I think luckily some of that is happening right now with Star Wars Insiders. They're producing these volume collections of short fiction. So they're actually, there's been a couple released so far, and it's had a handful of our stories in them. I think one just came out from Lucasfilm Press, a few months ago now. I know they're advertised on the back of Star Wars magazines like Star Wars Insider and such, and you can get them online now. But some of our earlier Star Wars work is getting republished and repackaged, and along with other short stories and stuff. So, and not to mention all the hundreds of illustrations we've done for tops and trading cards, and seeing those get reprinted in like the latest Star Wars Galaxy set from, is always an awesome thrill. So our work's still out there. It pops up, if you know where to look. If you're a Star Wars fan, especially if you're into collecting and reading and some of the licensed memorabilia, you'll still see it here and there for sure.
Well, when you were mentioning the West End game stuff, now I'm really disappointed. I actually my listeners have heard this before, but I had a story written for West End Games. They used to come out with the Star Wars Adventure Journal, which was
I used to illustrate for that. Yep.
Yeah, so I had a story that was written and had gotten into the final edit mode when literally overnight West End Games got out of the Star Wars business. So I still have it's in a manila envelope, my story, and I created a fighter, I created some characters.
And I could have
been the one doing it.
Yeah, I could have been the one to illustrate that, because I did a lot of those short stories in the Adventure journals. So that's my very earliest Star Wars work right there at the very beginning. So
those were cool days, because it was Wild West, right? I mean, other than, what I just remember my editor, like his notes were less about what I couldn't do and more about, well, that's not really how the cadence of how two fighter pilots would talk to each other in a battle. I was like, okay, I can work through that. But it was never like that planet could never exist. It was you can do that.
And those Star Wars role-playing game books were the foundation of the expanded universe. So at the same time, you had Dark Horse Comics creating, Dark Empire, Tales of the Jedi, some of the very earliest Star Wars comics. But at that exact same time, you have the Star Wars role-playing game creating these source books and adventure modules, introducing new characters and planets and vehicles, and all of that stuff was inspiring the comics, and they were also inspiring the novels as well.
Right.
So a lot of what Timothy Zahn was writing for Heir to the Empire and the Thrawn trilogy, he was mining those West End Games books for inspiration. So it all goes back to that.
It does. And I you and I, Joe, were talking before we got on about how we have a similar perspective on some of the social media conversations out there. And while I fully understand the people who are disappointed that the EU stuff became Legends, I love being a Star Wars fan now with that history, because we're seeing these things pop up. It's sometimes very subtly, sometimes like, with Thrawn, which is, a complete sort of retelling of a favorite character, but the names of things and the way certain things look, you just know that it came from that quote unquote dark time between Jedi and Phantom Menace. So
I don't get bent out of shape either when it comes to the new canon, because like you said, we're getting some of those old things slowly reworked back into the new mythology. And Star Wars to me it's like that. It's like the ancient mythology in our real world, where you get these Norse myths, or you get these Arthurian legends, and they're passed down from generation to generation. Sometimes they're told slightly differently. Sometimes the characters are a little different, or the story, but it's still in that same vein, that same tradition. And I think Star Wars as sort of the myth of our lifetime, it's following that same precedent. I mean, we're getting these similar stories retold a little differently. Old characters have become new again. So I'm also enjoying, this new ground that the Star Wars is breaking with the canon.
Yeah. Brian, do you have a particular character that you really like to illustrate? Is there a particular character or well, and a lot of your stuff is also, like you said, sort of the propaganda style or the travel posters. Is there a particular character or setting that you find yourself drawn to?
I mean, I think Obi-Wan I like, but I think like Boba Fett and Vader are the two that I just keep going back to like over and over and over and over again. They're just so freaking cool. And they're also popular. I mean, I think, I look back, and one of the pieces I'm most proud of would actually be one that's the Legend of Lando with Lando and Lobot on it. But unfortunately, like nobody bought that art, right? So it doesn't matter that I'm proud of it because like 5 people have it in their collection.
Yeah.
So, what do people want is they want more Boba Fett and more Vader and that kind of stuff. Now I try to not let that affect what I do. I try to like, this is the cool thing I want to draw this time. And like, I really feel like I went out on a limb with this new Star Wars Celebration piece because it doesn't have any of those like really main key characters on it. But fingers crossed, when people see it, they're still going to flip out and they're still going to want it. But yeah, as far as characters go, I mean, there's just something about Vader and Boba Fett. And I think just, it's the mask. It's that you don't know what's going on behind that mask. You have to imagine like what their emotion is and what their feeling is. You only have that like body posture and like the angle of the head, the angle of the helmet and things to play with, or how you blow the cape, or there's just, it's all this sort of like set dressing as character or costume as character, because you have to manipulate everything about the character's costume to get them to act or to get them to emote with some sort of feeling. If they're supposed to be sinister, or they're supposed to be, angry, or they're supposed to be commanding, or whatever it is, you have to do all of that without the luxury of like facial features. And so it's a challenge. At the same time, it's like super fun and rewarding.
Yeah. They say, one of my guests was talking about how Star Wars has the most recognizable silhouettes, right? You could put the silhouettes of the characters up and you would know exactly who it was. And that's pretty interesting too, because it gives you that sort of that iconography that doesn't exist for, I mean, you could put, I dare say, I mean, Batman has the little horns, but could you put Iron Man next to somebody? Yeah, maybe, unless you get to use the little glowing chest, he could be just about anybody. But Vader is Vader, and Boba Fett is Boba Fett, and Chewie is Chewie, and that you could tell it from any angle. Have you picked up on that too, Joe?
Oh yeah, I mean, that was something I read a long while back, where it was one of the genius approaches from George Lucas when creating Star Wars and working with artists like Ralph McQuarrie and Joe Johnston and designing these characters for the film in the early stages. I mean, George knew, like, silhouettes and keep these characters simple but iconic, and that I think is even evident actually when in another George Lucas property in Raiders of the Lost Ark, in that early scene with Harrison Ford when he first walks into Marion Ravenwood's bar in Tibet, and you see the door blow open, and you see that giant shadow of Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones with the hat, and immediately, and you've only watched the movie at that point for maybe 15 minutes, but that it's so iconic of a silhouette. And again, I feel like that's something that came from George even, and maybe it was a Spielberg idea, but still, it's such a strong, from a design standpoint, it's definitely a powerful tool as an artist or a filmmaker to sort of capitalize on and utilize.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the indie one because that is, I mean, because that's not a helmet. That's a
No.
simple hat, and the way Harrison Ford is Harrison Ford.
Yeah,
Right?
the way he
It's just-
stands, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Do you with the advent of the story group when Disney purchased Lucasfilm, has that impacted any of your design? How have you had to work with them? I know obviously the story group starts with the words and the outline and what the story is going to be, but have they had influence or impact on any of the artwork you've created?
I'll let Brian, and then I'll chime in with some thoughts on this.
Well, I had the good fortune to do a lot of work with Disney and Marvel before and after they came together, and so I had a lot of experience with that with that side of their story group, the sort of the Marvel story group. So when Disney, purchased Star Wars, it didn't really ruffle my feathers or upset anything, and which is a good thing. And someone who had been high up in Marvel also became high up at at Disney Lucasfilm Story Group. So we sort of already knew each other, and that was a nice position to be in. But at the same time, I don't really feel like Disney or Lucasfilm has ever tried to disrupt or interfere or stop me from being creative in any way. And the way I heard it and the way I'll repeat it again is that if you've ever been to a bowling alley and you see little kids bowling and they put those little rubber bumpers in the gutters to keep the kids from striking out, that's kind of all the story group is trying to do for someone like me, right? They're just trying to make sure that if they can help me get a strike, great, but they're going to make sure I don't strike out. They're going to make sure I don't do something stupid that makes me look bad and makes them look bad, right? Now, if I was higher up and involved in meetings and stuff, I might have a different insight on it, but as just someone who's doing licensed artwork, yeah, they're perfectly great. They just try to, keep us all on focus and make sure that we're representing Star Wars in a good way.
Yeah, they're not. The story group isn't necessarily dictating exactly what we're supposed to do necessarily if we are working on something in that aspect for Lucasfilm, but usually they're just sort of giving some general guidance, and they Lucasfilm gives their artists and their illustrators and their writers a lot of room to create and explore on their own. So like Brian said, they're just they're there to steer us in the right direction, but they're very open to our ideas and designs and concepts, and willing to roll the dice with us to see where they go. The only big difference I've sort of experienced since Disney has taken over Star Wars, that sounds drastic. Since they've bought Lucasfilm and sort of engineered Star Wars now, is, I would say, with Star Wars being as big as it is, and a lot of the stuff that we do is licensing related. So there's so much content coming out now on a regular basis, especially with the streaming, the live action stuff. So there's access to reference maybe isn't what it quite used to be because of the way the internet now. So things tend to be a lot more secretive, even for us as artists, as licensing artists. So I think it does make a difference these days for us, where I would say, like back in the earlier days of me working, say, on projects for the prequels, for example, it was early internet days, so a lot less chances of leaks and stuff. So, the artists were given more freedom and access to materials and maybe like a partial script or something to the movie. But nowadays it's kind of like pulling teeth to get certain information out of, I'm supposed to be drawing a certain character here, but I'm not exactly sure what he looks like. Can you throw me a bone? And maybe, so it's a little, the reins are a little tighter, I would say, just because Lucasfilm's trying to keep Star Wars pure and that experience as pure as possible, so that when it is unveiled to the public, we can all enjoy it without it being, spoiled by internet leaks or stuff. So, but there's still lots of NDAs being signed. There's still lots of things we can show and talk about, but it's just a little more trickier these days.
And I'll jump in and say I've worked with a lot of non-Disney related companies that also make films and TV shows and things. And in my experience, at least, Disney's the least secretive of all of them. Like they give us more leeway than a lot of others. And I mean, I wish I could say what it was, but I worked on one movie project where they literally wanted the artist to draw characters and stuff and just ships and sets. They're like, no, we're not going to give it to you. He's like, well, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to draw this stuff? So at least they do, even if it feels like a challenge sometimes.
Yeah,
they're not just being like, just wait till the movie comes out like everybody else. It's not like that. So
do you find that
definitely they're not bad at all compared to what some are?
Do you think it's related to, if you agree with the sentiment that Star Wars fans are a little bit more, and I say this because I do spend all my time in Star Wars social media, so I'm not as close to some of the other major franchises, but it feels like Star Wars fans have a very deep attention to detail, and the actuallys of the world tend to come out when Star Wars comes out. Do you think that lends itself to that, or is that just sort of a byproduct?
I mean, I think the Marvel fans are just as hardcore and just as geeky and nerdy when it comes, just like we are, when it comes to obsessing over this stuff.
Right.
And like you, I'm pretty much just in the Star Wars social media circles, so that's kind of all I can really relate it to is from the Star Wars point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, I just think it's just it might have more to do with Lucasfilm just wanting to keep the experience as pure as possible, really, and not so much because of negative feedback from fans necessarily. They just want Star Wars to be as exciting, and they want to knock our socks off, with each and every movie and episode of the live action series that they give us. So
I think also we have to remember that we don't have ownership over this. And I think whether you're a fan and you're building your costume to join the 501st, or whether you're an artist who's working on an official licensed property, when you spend 5, 10, 20 years of your life invested in Star Wars, at some point you start to feel some sense of ownership.
Right.
But we don't have that, right? It can feel that way, but it's not true. And so every once in a while, right, something happens where Disney has to step up and be like, no, not that, whether it's social media or whether it, whatever it is, right? And so then we all get that like little moment of shock where we're like, oh yeah, right. We don't have that sense of ownership. And then 5 more years go down the road and we're creating our artwork and building our costumes and our models and whatever, and we kind of forget again, and then one person runs it and they have to like smack us all down again.
It's interesting too, because I know I forget that there's that sort of, I've been referencing the bell curve a lot lately. You have the right side of the bell curve, which are the people who are, I would dare say, like the 3 of us who could tell you how many stripes are on a stormtrooper helmet, chin piece, and there's those people like us, but the masses that Disney and Lucasfilm are selling to, like, they don't know all this stuff. In fact, I just this past weekend, I was at a birthday party, and I saw a guy who had a Mandalorian, he had a Mudhorn and a mythosaur tattoo on his forearm, and he had "This is the way" written in Mandalorian on his arm. And I was talking to him, and I'm like, I'm going to Celebration this year. I'm really excited. He was like, oh, what's that? And I was like, wait a second, how does this guy not know Celebration? How does he not know what that is? He's got tattoos. But that's the masses, and that's who the stuff. I look at the work that you guys do very differently than the masses that you want to sell that bigger stuff too. Do you have to take that into account, or do you just jump in and be like, I'm making this for myself, the nerd, or do you ever find that you have to kind of step away from it and be like, I got to remember that that's not going to resonate? Do you ever find that with the work you do?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for the most part, as I think I can speak for Brian to a degree on this, like we're kind of viewing our artwork and our paintings and illustrations through the prism through the as fellow Star Wars fans, what we want to see and what excites us and what we're passionate about, what drives us when it comes to Star Wars, and we're trying to put that and pour that into our work as fans ourselves. With that in mind, I mean, I'm not thinking about other Star Wars fans as well. So it's a tricky balance, I think, being a commercial illustrator, because you still have to think in terms of marketability, in terms of accessibility. You don't want to alienate, too many people, but at the same time, if you got a really great idea and a really cool concept and you want to pursue it, you want to see it to fruition, you're still thinking about, like, is this too specific, or maybe I can, for the most part, it's so intuitive, I think, for both of us, that we don't really worry about that too much. I mean, we're just Star Wars fans first and foremost, so we just kind of, we come up with ideas and concepts, and I would say for the most part, we hit more than we miss when it comes to things. So, and I think that's just maybe a testament to our fandom and to the way we approach. I mean, really, Star Wars is the most commercially accessible franchise, and it kind of, it has that quality about it where it appeals to all demographics and all ages. So it's hard to not incorporate that that kind of mindset with projects as well. So it's sort of hand in hand, I think, in a way. So,
well, I think it has to be relatable, right? Like you said, accessible and relatable. And, I can use an example of, I did an illustration that had X-wings and Y-wings, and I think it had the U-wing on it. And I've done a couple of other with, a little A-wing in the background or something like that. And as much as I want to do a giant A-wing as like the main part of the image, just to do one, like, that appeals to like this tiny portion of the fandom that the licensors are just like, well, who's going to buy it, right? So we have to take the relatability and accessibility into consideration. But at the same time, I'm just trying to make things that I want to see for the most part. And I think we have to, as artists, we have to walk this fine line to make sure that our artwork doesn't become a commodity, right? Because you've got a certain aspect of fandom that they can walk into any Walmart or any Target and they can purchase commodity items. And some of those commodity items, like a t-shirt, might have a Star Wars image on it or something, right? But when you're going to Star Wars Celebration or you're going to the Acme Archives Gallery, you've now entered the world of collectible fine artwork. And that fine artwork might be on canvas, but also might be a limited edition silkscreen or limited edition lithograph on paper. So then you have this certain part of collector or fandom who they don't know the difference. What's the difference between this fine art print that cost $100 and this poster that cost $10, right? So as artists, sometimes we're in that position where we have to educate the collector and educate the fan to the value of what it is that we're creating, and the value of something that's limited to 250 pieces, or the value of something that's got a hand-drawn embellishment by Joe on it, or that you get to meet the artist and get a signature, or that it comes with a certificate of authenticity, or all these little things that make it different and make it special. And that was crafted by one person. It's not just a reproduction of a photograph or a still from the movie or something like that. So there's this, with something as big as Star Wars, where you have that entire spectrum of collectibles, from, the $5 item to the thousands of dollars items, right? We've all seen the giant maquettes and stuff. So, I mean, there's this giant spectrum, and we're in there somewhere, and we have to sort of stay true to that and make sure that everything that we're creating feels special and feels original and doesn't feel like a commodity.
That's great. That's the thing about a celebration, and that's the thing about all these amazing sort of, again, it's that collectible thing, right? And it's there's something about Star Wars that makes people want to own a piece of it, right? I mean, I have an obsession with helmets, as you can see behind me, but everybody's got the thing that they they collect. But there's something, if you are a Star Wars fan, even, most of those sort of middle of the bell curve, they have something. They have a Baby Yoda pop. They have something that they want to own a piece of. And I love that what you were saying there about the difference between, the $10 Walmart poster and the handcrafted limited edition artwork that you guys do. And it's good that those are available, because I think that's kind of what makes Star Wars special, is it gives you that you can get in as deep or as shallow as you want. But you're always welcome. Right. So, I guess one last question for you guys might be, what was sort of your biggest geek out moment as a Star Wars fan? Because you both said at the top, just like me, you were a Star Wars fan before anything else you did. I'll start with you, Joe. What might have been your most geek out moment in your profession now and working with Star Wars?
There's been a handful for sure. There's definitely a couple that come to mind. One that I've talked about before, I'll mention briefly, but another one I probably didn't talk about as much. This one, back in the early 2000s, I did a small Comic Con in Hudson Valley, New York. It was a Hudson Valley Expo. And it was me and our friend Justin, who Brian mentioned earlier, who introduced us, who's also an artist, and Jan Duursma, who illustrated the Star Wars comics for Dark Horse Comics. And we were three of the main artist guests at this really small convention that had other Star Wars celebrities, and one of them was David Prowse, who played Darth Vader. And no one really came. This is like 2002, 2003. Star Wars was huge again because Attack of the Clones had come out, but it was a small convention. It wasn't advertised very well. It was in this nice little quiet area of New York, and not a lot of people came out. By Sunday, it was pretty dead, so we all decided to bail early, and we invited David Prowse with us back to our friend Jan's house for a cookout that afternoon, and we got to spend the whole day with the Dark Lord himself. David was an awesome guy to talk to and hang out with, and he had so many stories, and we spent, I think, from like noon that day until 9 or 10 o'clock that night just hanging out with him and getting to hear so many amazing stories about Star Wars and about all the other films he worked on, and some of the Hammer horror films, because we were big horror fans as well. So so that was a really a memory that I'll always cherish, especially because Darth Vader has always been one of my favorite Star Wars characters. Another time I got Princess Leia, Carrie Fisher. I met her at Celebration Europe in Germany. I gave her a copy of our print that Brian and I had illustrated, The Slave Princess, and it's Boba Fett, and he's got Princess Leia on a chain in the slave outfit, taking her aboard Jabba's sail barge. And I presented Carrie with this limited edition print, and she loved it so much she grabbed me and kissed me on the cheek, and that was just who Carrie was, though. She was just so outgoing and so just did not hold back, and she was so giving, and I was frozen. I was like, oh my God, Princess Leia just kissed me. I can't believe it. So
that's amazing.
That was pretty awesome.
I love that. That's great.
Well, I think everybody's heard my Mark Hamill story at Star Wars Celebration in Orlando. So let me think back, and this will be Star Wars, but also just a little bit of sci-fi in general. And one of the really cool things about being in the comic book world is before all these comic book conventions really exploded, it was a much smaller scene. And when you would go as a guest, a comic book guest, well, they would stick you in the same green rooms and stuff with the actors because it hadn't all been divided out like it is now. And so I remember this really small Phoenix Con. It was like my wife and I, Will Wheaton, Peter Mayhew, Jeremy Bullock, and then we had Gil Gerard and Aaron Gray. And those are the ones that are in my memory vividly. And we're in this sort of after hours green room, and they're giving us food and drink and everything. And Aaron Gray's chatting up my wife and all this. And we're talking to Jeremy and Peter. And at one time I think we had like a spitball fight with Will Wheaton across the room, and as a mere mortal to get to hang out with these people and talk to them like in a little bit more real way than you could on the show floor was really nice. And Jeremy Bullock especially just like regaled us with stories from the making of the films and everything. He was super, super sweet. I mean, Peter was sweet, but Jeremy was more gregarious, I guess is the way to put it. And I remember that the sort of the pinnacle of that evening was after dinner. They brought out a birthday cake and they said, "Oh, by the way, it's Gil Gerard's birthday," and we all got to sing "Happy Birthday" to Buck Rogers. That's awesome. And I'm like, who gets to do that? Who gets to go to Buck Rogers' birthday party? So a little bit of Star Wars, a lot of sci-fi.
That's amazing. Yeah, Aaron Gray, I think, was one of my first little boy crushes because I just remember I loved Buck Rogers and of course,
that was a great show.
But wow, that's great. And it's funny because I very, very short version of my story. I started by writing trivia questions for my father's amazing science fiction horror trivia game. That was the name of the game, and I wrote all the Star Wars questions. But they, in the 90s, the mid 90s, the times you guys are talking about, they literally went from comic book show to comic book show to sell the game. And to your point, it was amazing. Just these big stars would walk through and sit at their tables, but it was a completely different time. Now people camp out the morning for a 7 o'clock signing, and then you're like, oh, Billy D. Williams is here today. Oh, that's cool. And you go and just talk, and nobody was talking to him. So I mean, it was very different times, and I think we're all very lucky to have any of those sort of memories and just these big geek out moments that are so great. And you guys have been I think very fortunate to be, now you've taken that experience, and now the stuff you guys do, the illustrations, the artwork it's now much more collectible, and it's beautiful stuff. Tell us one more time about what you're doing for Star Wars Celebration.
So Brian and I are both going to be appearing at Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim this May. We're both part of the art show, which means we each have a limited edition print that will be available exclusive to a celebration and to celebration attendees. So like we mentioned earlier, fans will be able to go online right now from May 1st until May 14th and pre-order this artwork. Hopefully before it sells out, you can grab a pre-order, and then you have to be at the event and pick up the artwork at the Acme Archives art show booth. So I'll have a booth at Celebration. I believe my booth is right near Hasbro, who have a pretty large footprint on the exhibit floor. So if you're around Hasbro and you're at Star Wars Celebration, and you're checking out all their awesome new Star Wars toys that they'll be exhibiting and sneak previewing, look for my booth. It'll be on the outside there on the corner somewhere. And then Brian will have a table in the art show as well. So you'll be able to go in the art show where you can pick up the artwork, and then you can also have us sign it, and you can check out Brian's artwork in the art show.
Yeah, and come see us and chat with us and get pictures and autographs and all that stuff, because we always have time to talk to everybody. And I think especially after a couple of years with no in-person celebration, we just kind of miss all of our friends and Star Wars family. So, don't be shy. If you see someone else, chatting with us, just walk on over, wait patiently for a minute or two, and we'll hang out, because we don't need to have any of those like missed moments. We've had way too many missed moments for the last 2 years. So let's make up for it this time.
Well, we're definitely excited to meet everyone. I mean, going to Celebration, it's not like we do a lot of Comic Cons, but Celebration's special. And I think Pete, when you go and experience it for the first time, it'll be mind blowing, because it's so much Star Wars love in one place, and not just individual love for the property, but all the fans and all the communal experiences that are happening there, and all that shared fandom between fans and friends. So every time we go to Star Wars Celebration, it feels like extended family for us, because we get to see our friends who we've made through Star Wars over the years, and we don't get to see very often if they're on another side of the coast or something. So it's such a positive experience, and that's a testament, I think, to what Star Wars is all about. So It'll just it's so much fun. It's our favorite event to do, hands down, anytime it comes around.
Excellent. Well, I, for one, can't wait to meet you, and I will be pre-ordering because I don't want to miss out.
Awesome.
So I'll definitely be pre-ordering that. And as I said, the link will be in the notes for the show. So Brian, tell us where we can follow you online.
Let's see. Where's it at? I'm at Octopolis, octopolis.com, and Octopolis on all social media. So find me there. I'm always posting up artwork, Star Wars and other that I'm working on, and little goodies to purchase and stuff too. So check it out.
Awesome. And Joe?
Yeah, and I'm pretty easy to find. It's just Joe Corroney. And my website's right there, joecorroney.com. All my social media and my online art store where you can purchase my artwork if you want to buy a print or a poster or a collectible or even an original sketch or original drawing or painting. You can visit my art store, which is part of joecorroney.com. So yeah, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm always updating my social media with new artwork. I'm doing a lot of conventions as well. So I just came back from Lexington Comic Con, and that was really fun. And it was great to see so many Star Wars cosplays, and I got to do some Star Wars sketching there as well. But yeah, feel free to follow me on any of my social media and check out my artwork there.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. It was great to meet you. It's so cool to know that just a couple of weeks I'll meet you face to face. So I'm looking forward to that. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Good. All right. Well, before I hit end, I want to see if I can get you guys to say individually, this is Brian Miller. You're listening to Around the Galaxy, and Joe, you can do the same thing. So you, Brian.
This is Brian Miller, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Awesome.
All right. This is Joe Corroney, and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Excellent. I'm going to hit the end button here. Hang on one sec.